Okay, now we move on to spaces for people. Questions on this audit? I don't believe there aren't any questions on this audit. Councillor Arthur, I thought you would.
Sorry to be predictable, convener. So I'll ask something since people are quiet, and I guess this is part of why Mr. Barwell's here. Oh, and David Sinclair is switched on as well. So when I looked at this report, and I know it's dated, it was undertaken around October last year. The key things seem to be around justification for the schemes, how feedback was taken on board, how the finances were managed, and also the kind of the exit strategy, if I can use that phrase. And what I wondered, though, is if the people in the council headquarters were surprised when the audit report reported those things, because these are the issues that literally thousands of residents had been raising. Really, not so much early on, but certainly through July, August, September. It's quite significant numbers. These were the key themes coming through. So I wondered if there was any surprise about what the audit report said.
I'll try and go first, convener. I was crossing my fingers actually it might go away with no questions there, but thanks, Councillor Arthur. So I guess the honest answer is probably no. There'll always be a degree of a view from different officers around the greens, the ambers, and the reds. But I think if you look at council, the scrutiny SFPs received over the past 16 months, you will find those themes in various committees. I recall commonplace being a very big topic of debate circa August, October, from memory. And that then led us on to develop the commonplace schemes that you kind of see on the ground now. So that is absolutely fair. The risks that Leslie and the team have called out, I think are right. I think, again, in the interest of transparency, there's been some healthy debate, but we have to respect the impartial role of the audit team and take it on the chin. I think in many ways you look at the points around reputational, don't want to say damage, but I can't give another word. And again, as officers, we were stuck in the middle of that because define reputational damage. There were people who were for spaces for people, there were people who were against, there were people who were always unfortunately going to have to upset, I'm afraid. And again, I know members have made absolutely clear around consultational engagement, and as we move forward with the kind of travelling safely initiative and the spaces for people, whatever that is called, and that remains clearly, members have set out clearly, and officers are implementing now an improved engagement and consultation approach. I think I would frame the context around the fact that when this audit took place in October, we were still very, very right in the thick of having to understand where the country was going, what was going to happen. We're getting a lot of concerned residents. I know it's a contested number, but circa 40% of people in Edinburgh not having a car, and understanding what that needed to happen to allow people to get to their place of work, and understanding what the place of work looks like, because again, government restrictions were changing all the time on that. The nature that circa 50% of our residents live in flats, and actually what that meant about providing space to get safely to exercise. So it was a tricky time for officers. But to come back to your point, Councillor, I can't say that any of these really surprised me. There are areas that we had to understandably scrutinise on members along the way, and certainly as hopefully the audit gets across, there have been some improvements made since this audit had taken place, and those findings were discussed with officers.
Yeah, and maybe I should be absolutely clear. I wouldn't put any blame on officers for a lot of this, because these comments were coming from the public to councillors, also to officers to some extent, I guess, as well. But councillors did see these comments coming through. So, and I doubt any councillor would be surprised by seeing the audit report. And I guess the question is really, what did we collectively do about it as a group of councillors? So I'm not really putting the pressure on you guys there, but huge respect for the effort that's been put in, actually, even though I didn't always agree with things. I think for me, though, just reflecting on the point you're making there, Mr. Barwell, is that obviously things were very different, April, May, June 2020. It was quite incredible. People just, you looked out your window and people were just wandering around, taking their daily allotted exercise. But by the time schemes like the Lanark Road, which is part of the deputation, came online, which didn't really come online, if memory serves me right, until maybe February this year, things had really moved on. This audit then had been complete. I'm not sure you know the findings or not, but really it did feel like a lot of the same mistakes were still being made. Let's not go over it all again, but it did feel that we weren't really learning. And again, I say we. I'm talking about councillors rather than council officers. So thanks for your response to that, and thanks for the frankness of it.
Okay, Councillor Arthur, you had your hand up for a comment.
Yeah, it feels like this is perhaps ranging beyond the scope of the report that's before us. So I'll make a couple of points, then I'll come back to the report. I think, firstly, it's not a question of whether or not we've followed the best possible council guidance then or now about engagement. My feeling is we didn't even follow Sustrans's guidance for engagement within the pandemic. We just really didn't do enough, and that's really what underlines the reputational issues, because engagement, it isn't about getting all the residents on board, Mr. Barwell. It's about trying to improve the designs, well, improve the aims firstly, and then improve the designs. That's why it's done, and hopefully build support for the projects as well. On people with disabilities, I think it's one of the most shameful aspects of the scheme. I think Mr. Barrow is right that people with disabilities can park where there's WL lines, but not if there's blips. I had residents who had always parked on Braid Road, but were told when I asked that they couldn't because it was a complete closure with the barriers at each end, so they could no longer do that. So that couple could no longer access the Hermitage. The issues that disabled people and disabled charities raise quite publicly around things like floating bus stops in the city, I found quite embarrassing actually. He's a resident, not a councillor, to hear some of the arguments put forward and the way that the council responded to that. And in terms of the justification for the schemes, so it's right that some of these schemes did exist in some stage before the pandemic. But then that raises the question where was the evidence of this? Where were the numbers? So schemes like Lanark Road, which were presented well after the start of the pandemic, at the turn of the year, there was not one piece of data that was presented to myself or to residents to justify that scheme. It was anecdotes. So I find it quite incredible if we're saying that this scheme always existed and there was always a case for it. That information, that data, wasn't available, and that's at the heart of really what this red finding was about. It was about the justification wasn't there. There was expert judgment, which we value, of course, but where was the justification for these cases? Residents were asking for that, and I think, coming back to my earlier point, I don't blame council officers for this. Councillors should have been saying as well, what is the justification for this? Where is the evidence? And here I'm really speaking about the schemes that were progressed well into the pandemic. Early on, it was difficult, it was extraordinary, but by the time we got to 2021, there was time and there was space to engage, to work with these disability groups and put forward the evidence case for these schemes. End of ramble. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Mr. Barwell, and then I. Sorry, Mr. Barwell. Sorry, I'm using my daughter's computer, and I've got a really. It's an overly sensitive mute button, so I keep putting myself on and off. Sorry about that.
No apologies, Convener. I've got a similar issue with a double-clicking mouse, but we'll not go into it. I get one thing. I've got to be honest. It's just come to me, Councillor Arthur. Building on the again, I wouldn't like to rehearse Lanark Road again. I do recall officers putting forward a very general comment that said arterial routes were, in that very first early report to committee of the areas. But again, I know we've dealt with lots of correspondence with residents out there that did it explicitly list Lanark Road. I'm not sure I can remember, to be honest. I wouldn't want to mislead committee. But in terms of the view that members have put across today and things have changed, the other thing I would also point out is as the pandemic moved on, I don't feel like it got any less hard, to be honest, but we did move to a point where early schemes were being approved through CIMT, I think as the audit calls out, and members will recall more latterly that there was a view then taken that actually once committees were more substantive and parent committees were in place, that we would then seek to bring forward actually an approval by committee to progress schemes to allow members oversight, because we were of a view that unfortunately there wouldn't be an opportunity to do full consultation happening. And if I'm perfectly honest, the big challenge for us as officers was how big that consultation would be. You know, who do you consult when you are changing a road? Is it the people that are front that road? Is it the next nearest community? Is it the whole city? Genuinely, that was a big problem that we was going through in our head as officers, because we were hearing what members were saying. We weren't sat there with our fingers in our ears saying, let's just ignore this. It was generally a challenge of saying, okay, if we were going to try and improve this, what could we do differently? But again, I just wanted to reiterate that Leslie and the team's audit was in place as of October, but what members would see after this point is then reports going to T&E as the parent committee to actually say to members, can you give us permission to move forward with these schemes? So there was, again, an iterative process just in the governance model wherever we felt we could develop that.